Many of the institutions that we built in the disaster field were developed in peacetime, post-World War II, in a period where we didn't really have to think about all hazard. What we're seeing now, and we took data from 100 years, and we tracked between 1910 and 2020 the number of events that have happened in meteorological disasters, fires, and other kinds of shocks, where there used to be years between events to months. Across the world, the frequency and impact of these kind of shocks is on the rise. Hi, this is Daniel Aldrich, the Dean's Professor of Resilience and head of the MS Resilience Program at Northeastern University. Welcome to the Future of Insurance.
Daniel, thank you very much for sitting down with me. This is, I was saying to you before we started recording, this is going to be a little bit different in a very good way because you live and breathe in the world of resiliency and you're not coming from an insurer or solution provider. So there's no corporate agenda to this whatsoever, just a discussion about something I think everyone in the insurance industry certainly is aware of and concerned about and needs to talk about more. So I can't thank you enough for making some time to sit down with me today.
Happy to do it. Really important stuff.
Can you give folks a little bit of background on you? And you obviously have a personal story that sparked so much of your work on resilience, but what is it that you focus on as well?
Sure. So I'll back up about 20 years.
Yeah.
So in the fall, actually the summer of 2005, my wife and I both finished our graduate degrees here in Boston, actually. That's where I'm standing right now. And we had an offer of a job down in New Orleans at Tulane University. So we drove in our old jalopy. I think it's about 15, 16 hours to get down there, maybe a little bit longer, with two young kids in the car. In fact, we passed through a minor hurricane that July in 2005, getting down there, got to our new house. So we had a new job, we bought a new car, we furnished the house, put all stuff in there, we had guests over. Everything was fine the first 6 weeks. And then the weekend of the 28th of August arrived. And we noticed that our neighbors were packing up, putting their dogs, their grandparents, and their coolers in the back of their cars and driving off. We were clueless. We had no idea what's going on. We weren't paying attention to news or local things. And of course, that was Hurricane Katrina on its way.
Yeah.
By Saturday night that weekend, one of our neighbors, concerned about the idiots from the north who had just arrived that were still there with the lights on and talking, said, like, why are you still here with kids? You need to leave. So we were like, are you sure? What happens if we leave? Blah, blah, blah. So eventually she convinced us, which her name was Kathy. So now it's 3 p.m. Sunday morning. We put one of our vehicles on higher ground. We pack up our house thinking we'll be back there in a few days, take one small bag of stuff and our kids, who are very excited to be awake, start driving. Of course, all the roads were counterflowed from New Orleans. You can't go east anymore. You have to go only west. So I-10, all 6 or 8 lanes are going west now. Takes us about 14 hours again to drive the 4-hour drive from New Orleans to Houston. We get the last hotel room on the edge of an industrial park in Houston, settle in for the night with our kids. We finally go to bed. We wake up Monday morning thinking the rain is gone, which is true. The hurricane had passed. But then we hear these screams from the lobby of the hotel. There's water in the streets. Always a bad thing to hear when you wonder what's going on. Of course, the levees had broken, right? Mismanagement. A lot of poor choices made by both the city and the Army Corps of Engineers meant that the levees broke. So our house was near Lake Pontchartrain, a place called Lakeview. And we ended up with 13 feet of water. Our house was elevated about 3 feet off the ground. It didn't make a difference. So everything on our first floor was destroyed. Books, hard drives, paper records, clothes, kitchen appliances, nothing was left. Literally, the water ate through the metal. And I had a lot of free time that fall semester, right? The fall semester, that Monday would have been the first day of school for me teaching at Tulane and the first day of school for my kids at their new school there in New Orleans. That never happened. The 2005 never came for us. So we ended up getting a lot of offers, places to come and sit, and your kids knew the place to go. We actually drove back to Boston again. So now we're back in Boston that fall. Some very kind mentors of mine gave me an office to work in. And I began thinking, okay, well, I'm not doing anything normal. My kids are in a school again. We're slowly rebuilding a household of goods and clothing so we can wear more than one pair of clothing. What does it look like to recover? And I began to read everything. I'm an academic, I'm a nerd. So I began to get every book, every article I could find on disasters and recovery. I noticed there's these really bizarre split in the literature, right? So there's a bunch of stuff from economics and business, which centers on what I'd call market-based approaches. So insurance would be the primary example, other instruments as well, catastrophic bonds and so forth. But the other side was the state, right? So we had the market and the state, the argument that somehow when a disaster comes, FEMA is going to swoop in and save us. So as a side note, by the way, of course, we were a young couple. I was very naive. Back then, you had to fax in your request for aid. So every time I could, and this was about every hour, twice an hour, I tried to fax in my 10-page application, and it would go, take about 15 minutes and it would fail,
Yeah.
or it would fail on the last page, or it would be busy.
Yeah.
So it took me several months to finally get the application in, and when it got in, it was rejected. And speaking of market solutions, we intended that Monday to activate our home insurance. We didn't have time because Monday never arrived. So we didn't have support from the state. We didn't have support from the market. So those two
Wow.
pillars I'm reading about over and over again about,
Yeah.
in Japan, in India, in Russia, in America, when disasters come, here's what happens. Neither was actually our case. What we saw
Yeah.
instead was the aid that we got, the clothes that are on our backs, the place we got to stay, the office I was offered, they all came through networks.
Yeah.
So that really began a completely new field for me. We're doing work, trying to understand, one, how will we recover? How will our neighborhood, our city recover? And then trying to understand, okay, is it really about the market and the state, or is there perhaps like a third part of that triangle, which I would say is community? And much of the
Yeah.
work the last 20 years that I've been doing has been on the role of the community, not only in the aftermath, like we got help for clothing our family and getting them in schools and getting a place to stay and furnishing it, which is great, but also in things like having a vision, joint recovery plans. How do you know what's going to look like in 10 or 15 years? Is it from the outside or the inside? And of the 100 and plus articles I've written and 5 books, most of them have been on this idea of resilience to shocks. And we've done work around the
Yeah.
world. I've done work on the Paradise Fires, actually in California. A paper just come out a week ago. We've done work on Japan, Australia, on Israel, and I've done work with a lot of different people in different disciplines, trying to understand again, is resilience, is the ability to bounce back, this concept of rebuilding as was, which was
Yeah.
FEMA's definition for many years, right? You get money to rebuild as was, and if you deviate in any way, forget about it.
Yeah.
Or is resilience something different, where the new form that your house, community, city take is a one that's actually better suited for the environment in which we're living? So
Yeah.
anyway, that's a long way of saying a lot of things have happened since that 2005 hurricane, but really trying to understand better what's going to happen, right, in
Yeah.
these shocks. And of course, the LA fires, unfortunately for us, I think are a fantastic example, a tragic, fantastic example
Yeah.
of the realities we live in the early 21st century.
The lessons, thank you for sharing all that. The tragedy reshaped your life in many ways, not just for directly, what happens to your family in the wake of that, but your whole career and I don't know what you were working on before, but clearly,
Japanese energy politics. So a very
okay.
niche field that
Yeah.
most Americans probably don't even think about or care about. And honestly, at this point, it was a lot of fun. I liked what I did, but for me, there's more now this overlap of the personal and the
Yeah.
professional, where I deeply care about the field. I deeply care about getting this right.
Yeah.
And the good thing is, because I don't have to work for a business or a firm or whatever, I'm in a university, I can go where the data takes me, right? If the
Right.
information
Right.
shows me that insurance is the way forward, great. If it's the state, great. If it's this third part of the
Yeah.
triangle, then also great.
There's two threads I want to pull on based on what you were saying. First is as soon as you hit community outside of the US, I'm thinking about like the African insurance market in particular. Um, One of the reasons why, or a barrier to the success and the penetration of insurance as a commercial, enterprise in Africa, is the level of trust and reliance and development of the community as your first line of defense when things are tough. Family, community, et cetera, not turn to a company and expect them to solve your problems. And it's like culturally ingrained. And then I look in the US and typically we think it's someone's got to pay for this, not how do we support each other. But if you think about the losses, so often they're community based as well. Like people in LA understand this, that it's not just you. It's not that you had a flood internal to your house. It's everyone's home is getting hit. Everyone evacuated. Everyone's got smoke. Even if your home's still standing, there's smoke around. There's things are happening at a community level. Hail, hurricanes, they hit communities. It's not a single event to a single location. So it's sort of ironic as you're saying that we don't think about that, at least in this market, when actually the losses are occurring at the community level, and so much else, so many other parts of the world, community is the first line of response.
And if you think about that and taking that further, right? So imagine, as has happened in New Orleans, you have a row of homes like mine in Lakeview. You have 10, 15 suburban homes, and out of them, three have the insurance to come back. The other 12 are inherited mortgages where they didn't have to have flood
Yeah.
insurance. Or as many people that I spoke to, I think only roughly a third of the people that we interviewed for the book projects that I've done, a third in any society, have typically held full insurance on their property to that
Yeah.
shock. So if there was a fire in Kobe after the earthquake, a third of the people had that, one out of three. If in New Orleans there was a flood, and by the way, of course, we can talk about insurance companies arguing, was it damage from the wind and the rain coming to the top, or was it floods? We can talk about that sort
Yeah.
of side as a sidebar. But again, about a third of the people did. So let's say a third of the community, 12 homes, three or four have that. Do you want to live on a block where you're the only light there that's going to, there's a block of empty, as in my case, for a long time, a slab, there's a concrete slab where the house was, a slab, a broken down home, and then a brand new home. Do you want
Yeah.
to be the only brand new home? So the recovery process itself can't be me thinking, is my home okay? Because that's certainly not what it's about, right? It's not about my home. I didn't move there because of my home. Typically, I moved there for a lot of stuff. The
Yeah.
community atmosphere. Can my kids, my dog, my family have a place to go outside and play in? A
Yeah.
school nearby that's operational, business nearby that. So every layer here is a catch 22, right?
Yeah.
We know that people want to go back to a community that's whole and normal, that are feeling
Yeah.
normalcy again. So again, if the insurance industry or any other industry that's involved in making people whole only applies to some of them, and it's completely uncertain whether, let's say, half the homes in Altadena have any kind of insurance at all. And
Yeah.
if they did have insurance, it would be enough to cover rebuilding costs at a time of major crisis, which we should talk about, right? When
Yeah.
both labor and materials, as we have seen over and over again post shock, spike 30
Yeah.
to 60%. This is certainly New Orleans case, right?
Yeah.
The likelihood of you getting a contractor to your home the first year after New Orleans was a function of, did someone in your family work in contracting? Because otherwise you can get on the list, right? So
Yeah.
would you want to be the only home that somehow manages to make it back within a few months? And then you wait for normalcy again so that you have
Yeah.
neighbors and an active park and a school and a barista that you know nearby and can commute to work. Or as we've seen often over and over again, this information set, as we call it, where no one really knows what's going on. Right now, no one really knows how long it'll take for insurance companies to pay out those who do have coverage. And
Yeah.
no one really knows how much it'll actually cost to rebuild homes, many of which were fair insured homes, meaning you're paid back at a level, not to rebuild level.
Yeah.
You're paid back at what you paid into. So maybe that's 300,000, right? Maybe that's 600,000. Maybe if you're lucky, it's the maximum of 3 million. Who knows, right? But whatever you paid into, it's very unlikely the price that you paid into will cover. So that means now
Sure.
we're talking about to a two-tier recovery.
Yeah.
Those families that have insurance, maybe they could hire a private firefighting brigade. And Chubb wrote their own personal policy, right? And there are people waiting
Yeah.
for it. And they have no problems, right? They can get contractors, can get stuff flown in from Oregon. They're going to get it all done, and they'll be back and up and running. Who knows by the summer? But families nearby that didn't have that level of personalized risk care, that didn't have the money to rebuild out of pocket, they're now either out of the rental market completely, where we've
Yeah.
seen spikes already, 40 to 60% in rental costs,
Yeah.
or they have to look now, okay, well, I might get some money from insurance. Does it make any sense to rebuild here? Because
Yeah.
now if I do have to get a mortgage and I'm gonna have to go under these plans, I'm paying 2 to 3 times market rate just for the insurance by itself.
Yeah. And I think that 1 in 3 having coverage, I would expect that's a increasingly inaccurate overstatement as more and more places become too expensive to get insurance in, and frankly for the carriers it's too expensive to sell the insurance, so they're still losing money on it, so they can't afford to sell it, the homeowners can't afford to buy it, so people are reducing coverage, increasing deductibles, so that there might be some coverage, but it's less and less of what's actually needed. So I think that 30% or a third, whatever it was, is likely to be shrinking going forward, at least in these areas where there is a serious problem. And the number of places that qualify as areas that are a serious problem is increasing.
I mean, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, two things. My parents, my wife's dad still live in North Carolina.
Hmm.
And there we had Asheville, which is where my parents have gone for art and for
Yeah.
pottery and for all kinds of amazing events, and was literally calling itself, billing itself as a climate haven,
Yeah.
right?
It's
Until you
destroyed.
have riverine flooding,
Yeah.
which is not expected by residents. But again, if you look at maps of the likelihood of impact of climate change, right, that kind of moment when a town that thought of itself as well removed from the serious risks of rising sea levels, right, got mashed, completely mashed. And the articles now, for example, about the restaurant industry trying to figure out how do they rebuild, right?
Yeah.
There several months went by when they told tourists, please do not show up at all. I mean, one of the things I'd like to think about is this metaphor of peacetime and wartime. much of the insurance industry that we have, many of the institutions that we built in the disaster field were developed in peacetime,
Yeah.
meaning, post World War II, in a period where we didn't really have to think about all hazards because it was very clear to us, here are pockets of the society, pockets of our communities, areas, by the way, that typically were more vulnerable anyway, right? Along a
Yeah.
riverbank, New Orleans, or wherever else. These are the areas that we're going to have to think about insuring, right? Maybe we'll have to have government assistance with the National Flood Insurance Program. Maybe you'll have to stuff. So that was peacetime. And for many years, that model worked really well, right? Then you start with the Fort McMurray fire, right? The first $3 billion+ fire in North America. Everyone's like, oh, okay, well, it's a little unusual. We got tar sands, we got some combination of weather things. Okay, that's unusual. Next year, 2017, $14 billion of damage
Yep.
to California wildfires.
Yep.
Okay, well, all right, so that was bigger than like Irma, Maria, and Harvey together, which is like 92. Then we had the Camp Fire, right, in 2018, $12 billion. And now you begin to see insurers think, okay, whoa, hold on a second now. First of all, we have all this regulation from California on how we can operate in state,
Yep.
right? Is it logical for us to operate there, right? And then you see the state start to think, wow, we're about to lose a bunch of insurers, right? There's absolutely what we call market failure going on, meaning
Yeah.
at normal pricing, it is not possible for a firm like an insurance firm to operate successfully in California across
Yeah.
the state. Maybe in some pockets, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a place. You have some concrete bunkers built by Mark Zuckerberg, like 85 feet underground, right?
Yeah.
They're fed by artisanal springs and whatever else. But for the average community now across California, which now is facing a variety of things like, electrification risks from PG&E,
Yep.
arsonists from, whatever local residents who are in trouble, all these kind of things going on. So you have market failure, and FAR comes along, right? FAR says, okay, there's market failure. People are leaving the state. Out of the 12 insurers, 5, let's say, I mean, I say at least 5 have gone. We have some left. Let's work out a deal, right? We're going to figure out a way to keep insuring people to stay here, to stay in California. We want people to stay. The state wants people to stay. So we're not going to call it a government-run program. No one likes that, right? Even in California, which is quite interesting. So again, going back to the state and market, we're going to give it to the market, have these insurers work out a way together, right? That by paying in at triple, in many cases, triple existing rates, they're going to get some kind of coverage, not rebuild coverage, right?
Yeah.
But some kind of maybe slightly parametric coverage. They're going to pay you back exactly at 300K or whatever, up to $3 million. And then someone said, well, okay, well, how about reinsurance? What if something really, catastrophic happened? You got 300 million plus, right, on cash. How are we going to do? Oh, $5 billion will be completely fine. $5 billion for a thing. Now we're talking, probably in this case, I've seen numbers of insurance exposure, maybe upwards of $6 billion, maybe more.
For
So
the
now
fair
we're
plan.
so now we're past
Yeah.
the reinsurance rates, and now FAIR kicks in and says, well, okay, we solved this with the market. So every California insured person now will be paying a little bit of a tax to rebuild those homes
Yeah.
in Malibu and Altadena. So now you have a bunch of people talking to me, at least, and I had bankers on the phone yesterday, insurance last week, thinking, hold on, what's going to happen here?
Yeah.
So we're going to have behavioral shifts now. Now we have people saying, holy crap, like, I cannot afford the insurance even with FAIR. I can't afford it. So we're going to have people who should be insured dropping the coverage.
Yeah.
Then as they start dropping coverage and policies become more specific, fewer firms can operate in the field. So you have this horrible cascading failure,
Yeah.
right? So what began as what I would call a market attempt to keep Californians insured is now possibly going to cascade into not only a broader pullback of reinsurance, right? Because now reinsurers are thinking, is this really a market where we can operate? And I've already seen
Yeah.
several articles published about this. But now, it isn't just California saying this, right? The FAIR program in California is matched by 32 other states that also have what I would call market failure situations, where again, it's clear with the costs as they are now and the likelihood of damage, you cannot function as a firm in these states. That's
Yeah.
more than half of North America right now
Yeah.
is sitting in a situation where the normal homeowner cannot just go into a local firm and say, hey, I'm buying a home here, 1,800 square foot condo in Boston. What are reasonable insurance rates? And buy that as I would buy any other service anymore.
Yeah.
Now states are stepping in and saying, well, we see insurance is important. Do we need to get the federal government involved? I mean, good luck with that right now under the new administration,
Yeah.
asking the federal government to step in now, like with the National Flood Insurance Program, and to
Yeah.
begin becoming the insurer of last resort. I mean, this looks to me like we are in a new era. So again, go back to this metaphor of peacetime and wartime. We are in wartime now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we are in wartime with institutions that were built for peacetime. And that means we're fighting our firms, our procedures to fight the last war. And you can see
Yeah.
all this stuff California is doing now, stepping in, passing bills. That's not changing the overall structural
No.
risks that exist still in California. Or again, Colorado, same
Yeah.
problem. Florida,
Right.
same problem. And now we're not talking about fires here. We're talking about all hazards. Lyons, Colorado had a combination of fires and floods in 2013. So this is for me where it gets interesting because again, is the market, I would call this really the state and the market, but are these the only pillars we can think about when we think about how our society, other societies, are going to get ready for climate change?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to this. Uh, I was having this conversation yesterday with a group of underwriting professionals, and it was sort of challenging them is what do we do? Because the tools we have right now from a market standpoint aren't fit for purpose, and the existing government solutions are also not fit for purpose. And both those things, just by their very existence, may be pushing individuals to do things we should not be doing. Like as my wife and I got into this last night, she's like, people aren't getting their homes paid for to rebuild. And it's like, well, that's very sad. And perhaps they shouldn't be rebuilding there. There's a reason. Like this isn't when you talked about in the 20 teens big fire was a single spike in people's eyes, and it like goes back. 2011 was a terrible year globally for catastrophes, and then
Oh, yeah,
2012 was fine. And there's
right.
still people who think it's like, oh, you have these blips, and that's what insurance is, and you have bad years, and then you make up for it in the good years, and it's a cycle. I don't think that's the situation anymore. So when you talk about it's like wartime, it's not just wartime, it's like a perpetual, because the catastrophes are not a blip anymore. This is the norm, and they're different catastrophes in different areas, but and not just a US thing. So the
We have a
question is,
yeah.
should we be building in the in parts of North Carolina and along the Gulf Coast, whatever Gulf you want to call it, like any Gulf Coast anywhere? These are serious risks that we're sort of subsidizing the sense of the true risk and cost of living there. And maybe that's the wrong answer.
I mean, several things. I mean, I completely agree. And in fact, we've got a paper that we have under review right now. So we're calling this the poly crisis, which is a fancy way of saying it isn't, as you said, just a few blips where
Yeah.
we have the McMurray fire. Oh, okay, well, then we have the Paradise fires, or then we have the campfire. No, no. What we're seeing now, and we actually done this, we took data from 100 years of disaster events going back to literally the 1910s. And we tracked between 1910 and 2020 the number of events that have happened across different fields. So
Yeah.
what we call meteorological disasters, fires, and other kind of shocks, and also geological disasters, just to keep us honest, so earthquakes and so forth. And then we tried to figure out, okay, has there been a change in the number of events over time? And has there been a change in their impact over time? And what you see, and this is it's a terrifying paper actually to work on, because what you see is the following. Where there used to be years between events, let's call it like the Alberta fire and the Paradise fire,
Yeah.
or now it's called the LA fires and whatever's going to come the rest of this year.
Yeah.
That has gone from years, plural, to months.
Yeah.
So we can show now across the world, and the data set we have covers not just North America, but it covers all across the entire world.
Yeah.
Across the world, the frequency and impact of these kind of shocks is on the rise. And of
Yeah.
course, the reason why they're on the rise, and by the way, this really ramps up to like 25 years ago, so we start seeing this massive uptick, is because of climate change, which is the big elephant in the room that some people are talking about and some people don't want to talk about it. But the simple reality is, just talking about the LA fires, we had the atmospheric river dumping water in
Yeah.
California, allowing vegetation to grow where it didn't typically normally grow.
Yeah.
Then we had what we call the climate whiplash, which is you go from really wet to super dry. And now there's a drought for a long period of time, going into a period when there's almost never a fire, which is the wintertime in California. Actually, my brother lives there. I lives there currently. I used to live in California. It's a great place to live. But the reality is that flip from super wet vegetation growing to super dry meant now we have this kindling
Yeah.
ready, right, by metric tons.
Yeah.
So this is not just, okay, it's another blip. Like Paradise Fire is a blip, Katrina's a blip. This is a cycle, a pattern of this polycrisis, this wartime we're in now, when none of the institutions that we have normally relied on to get us ready for a shock are around. And the other problem, and so forget about the markets, the way that we think about it, just as normal humans, like getting up in the morning, getting my kids to school, paying my mortgage, getting my car to the shop, we just don't think about shocks and risks in the right way, right? So I'll give you some examples that we saw after Hurricane Katrina and after Kobe. People who actually had insurance dropped it. Why? Here's what they said. It's a once in a lifetime event.
Oh,
Hurricane Katrina is not going to hit again.
yeah.
2005, I'm done. Maybe 2000 and 2015, maybe 2030, maybe 2100. But this is a once in 100. That kind of terminology
Yeah.
that we use in our heads and on the news, a once in a lifetime, a once in 100-year event. That's incredibly wrong language.
Yeah.
Because then we see this behavior where, literally, people who had insurance, same thing in Kobe after the earthquake and fire, people said, well, what's the likelihood of another earthquake hitting Kobe in my lifetime? I can drop now what's a $2,000 a year cost
Yeah.
and save
Yeah.
that money and put my kids in some after school programs.
Yeah.
So that we're really bad about thinking about risk. So part of what our lab does is try and think through what are the things we can do to raise our consciousness to think, in what ways am I living in the right place and living in the right way? It's funny,
Oh,
I've seen so many articles on the LA fires. I've seen like three that have talked about the concepts of different zoning and different construction codes.
yeah.
Three articles.
I haven't seen anything on zoning. I think everyone's seen that one house that, there's that one architect's house that they do the drive by.
But
But
if you actually read the
yeah.
interview with the architect who built that house, what they said, they don't want to stay there anymore because they had to watch their friends'
Right.
homes burn to the
Right.
crisp.
Back to your
And this,
community point.
back to the community. Exactly. So this is again where you have one of my colleagues, Steve Flynn here, calls that an island of resilience in a sea of fragility. And you do not want to be the last home standing
Yeah.
there as you're waiting for months and years of people to finally rejoin your home and your barista and
Yeah.
the things that make life normal again. Because being a bunker, like we could all build deep underground, right? Homes that
Yeah.
would be safe from most shocks, maybe not from seismic shocks or whatever, but that's not how we want to live. We want to live in interactions in the sun with parks and
You didn't
coffee.
buy a house in a wasteland. That's not what you signed up for.
Exactly. It's funny. Actually, I saw someone trying to sell, I think it's in Nebraska, some kind of World War II era, Cold War bunker where you
Yeah.
basically bet like a 5,000 square foot concrete monstrosity,
Yeah.
which is a front door which locks from the outside, very helpful, and the inside is empty. And these are like half a mile apart. And I was looking at it, and they asked them, how many have you sold? He's like, we've sold a few. But again, who wants to live in Nebraska, with a half mile to your nearest concrete neighbor, no schools, no libraries, no parks, no interactions, no coffee? Like, again, the reason that we choose to flock to cities, I'm in Boston here, white people Los Angeles, is because there's a certain love that we have for sociality and for
Yeah.
community. And nothing that we could talk about in terms of resilience and rebuilding is going to go anywhere, right? If we're talking about, well, we're going to build back blah, 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 a concrete house with steel wool in every vent, with automatic
Yeah.
sprinkler systems, and there's no vegetation nearby. That's just not how we live in society.
Yeah. Yeah. We could talk about this for hours. I will say one of the pushbacks. So the work we do at PLRB, part of it is on building code side, and I think Florida, the parts of the state that were really wiped out in the late 90s and 2000s, the newer construction is proof that no, building codes do matter. Now they matter. It's like now it's 140-mile-per-hour roof. That's great. Storms are now surpassing that.
Right.
So that might be fine for a period. And when there's too much energy in the atmosphere, we are going to see things approaching 200 miles per hour. And then you end up like Mount Washington, where there's chains on the roofs holding it, to the ground at the observation house.
Exactly.
But people say, it's too expensive. And I hear that. Some of the things are free, like in that architect's home in LA, the one that he designed, there's no overhangs on the roof.
Right.
So if anything, that roof, well, the underlying structure would be cheaper because there's less material, right? So that's a no-cost way to reduce the chance that embers get caught and spin around. So not everything has to cost more. Some of it may be design choices, et cetera. And then people say, well, then all the houses look the same and we don't want that. If anyone's seen the show Weeds, it's the entire opening sequence. We Americans are famous for our like developments that all look cookie cutter. That's not a new thing. So maybe talking out of both
Or if
sides
you
of our
visit any,
mouth.
1/5 condo, right, in most communities, which literally
Yeah.
the first floor is a Stop and Shop or a Piggly Wiggly or whatever, an insurance store, and
Right.
the top five are the condo. Those are all exactly the same build. I mean, I
Yeah.
live in Boston.
Yeah.
We have oodles of those. So it is funny. I also saw this. We studied the Marshall fires in Colorado. Again, another fire in a
Yeah.
zone that was supposed to be fire free. That fire jumped a 6-lane highway. right, to get and destroy those 1,000 homes there.
Yeah.
And they began talking about, well, look, we can build back better in a real sense. Let's build back with, for example, electrification, no gas. Let's build back with homes that are fireproof. And the immediate pushback was, no, we can't do that. It's going to press people out of the market. Well, you have to think about this, right? Are we really saying that after a major fire, which again has never happened here before, the likelihood is zero? Well, if it's not, then if we build back as was, we are basically inviting history to repeat itself.
Right.
So do we have to think about this as, okay, we'll subsidize some of the homes, right? And the same with Boston, for every major development, a certain percentage you have to be for people.
Yep.
Right, great. But for those of you who want to have the joy of living this part of Marshall, Colorado, or in Los Angeles, or wherever, or Louisiana, as I said, again in New Orleans, then you do have to elevate. You do have to put in slate roofs. You do have to do the work, right? That's going to cost you more money, because otherwise, someone's going to pay the cost. And I think our society is bad about talking about this, right? Someone always pays the cost, and we don't like thinking about who's that going to be. With FAIR, it's very obvious now that other insurance holders will be paying some of the cost of rebuilding homes in Los Angeles. Now, are we talking about that openly right now? In other words, is someone sitting up in, I'm just making this up, in Palo Alto thinking, okay, when I think about my bills for next year, right, whatever I had last year, it's going to be plus $500 or whatever. And then I'm going to get that. I'm going to go, what's going on? Then we might have the political discussion of, well, isn't it reasonable for society to absorb the risks of those who are living in these beautiful, amazing areas that just happen to be incredibly vulnerable, which might be a lot of society now, Asheville, right? Colorado. So then we start thinking, again, this is why I go back to things like zoning and construction, right? From the bottom up, literally, when we're planning communities, when we're starting to build them, when we're thinking about renovations, what are we doing, right? Are we just calling them out on, electrical code questions and the number of parking spots, which unfortunately, I'll be honest, Boston did that for many years. The number of parking spots was set, and if you happened to build a driveway that wasn't large enough, they came by, gave you a ticket, and made you redo it. Is that what we're concerned about? Or are we thinking now about flooding, for example, which South Boston certainly is getting every high tide? The aquarium T-stop, which is our subway, literally filled with water. Like there's enough water to fill it from the bottom to the top of the stairs. It's a tremendous thing to watch. So what are we doing about zoning? Are we zoning certain areas, right? Are we thinking about blue and green construction, right? Infrastructure that can absorb water. This is what Europe's been doing for a while. Think about Rotterdam, the Bentham Plain, right? In Amsterdam. It's literally a civic plaza. When floods come through, that civic plaza converts basically into a swimming pool, and a massive trillions of gallons of water can get stuck in the bottom of that place, keeping houses from getting damaged, or building on the water, right? Again, right? Other ways of handling this, right? So if you recognize that the water is a major risk, it's maybe not good to fire, but good for water, here's an approach. And we, for some reason, I have not heard that conversation among builders, among designers, among planners. How are we building in to the next generation of homes, to the next generation of zoning, a recognition of the real threats that we face? And again, this is the idea of we're bad with statistics, we're bad with thinking through risk. I think about getting my kid to school, and I think about getting home again. I'm not thinking about the likelihood that it's going to be a fire that will destroy all those buildings.
Yeah. Honestly, we could talk for hours. I would love that. I think people would get bored with us eventually, but I can't thank you enough, not just for making some time right now, but this is a conversation and food for thought that is needed so drastically, because we can't, those of us in insurance are very much feeling this right now, where it's like we're charging more and it's not enough, and the buyers are feeling like they're charging more, it's more than I can afford. The market doesn't clear there, and that's the only mechanism we're really using, or we just pull out and leave it alone. So someone just said, so we just need the regulators to let us raise rates. I'm like, no, because it's still not good enough for us, and then we're going to get adversely selected, because only those who can't find any other solution are going to come to us, which means we should be charging more. So we're never going to get to profitability. So it's never going to work. And ultimately, this is not really the solution. And it can't be kind of single pronged. There's so much more to this. I love the work that you're doing. I wish you didn't have to do it, but I'm thankful that you are. So thank you for spending some time today.
A joy. And, this is a great conversation.